We are working on element 5 today, which has to do with the physical layout of your classroom. And the element specifically asks, what do I typically do to organize the physical layout of the classroom? I know that I didn't ask you to purchase the actual book, Becoming a Reflective Teacher, but I'm going to use some of the comments from it as a resource for this short clip. But you know that within the Padlet wall link, you can access the free reproducibles that come from the online Marzano site to look at the teacher evidence and student evidence columns about this particular element when you're evaluating your goal setting evidence that you find. The teacher evidence of a classroom where the physical layout has been designed rather well is that for starters, there's a clear traffic pattern for everything. When you are moving about the room, you don't have to wonder, do I have to squeeze through these desks? Do I walk this direction to get there? Kids aren't taking 5 different paths to get to the pencil sharpener. There should be a clear path for every location, whether it's material related or it's related to accessing you or accessing other students. I've already stated it needs to provide easy access to materials and centers, and additionally, it should be decorated in a way that is relevant to the current content that you're teaching. But it's also pleasing to the eye, it's comforting, it's safe, it's encouraging, and it helps instructionally, even if instructionally you're not just talking about core content. As you're going to talk about in this course and class is we're going to talk about social skills and self-regulation of learning. So when you're decorating, you have the opportunity to reinforce or even introduce things other than just your science, social studies, math, and English content. Student work needs to be displayed within that, and evidence of student success, which is another element that we're going to talk about eventually, talking about how do we celebrate student success. Student evidence of the physical layout of the classroom being well designed would be that you see students moving easily about the classroom. There's not jostling with one another, there's not pushing and shoving or knocking one another's materials off their desk to get through to the next item they need to get to or to get to another person. They are using materials and learning centers independently without having to ask 20 questions in order to figure out, can they go, what do they get, where's this, where's that. And if you have materials provided for them, then you need to make sure there's a way for them to let you know if the materials are out or are missing. So procedurally speaking, which was element 4, you needed to have already addressed, what do I do if the Kleenexes are out? What do I do if there's no more filler paper in the back of the room? And that's how they get their paper. So all of those what do I do ifs, you actually have to address procedurally. So when you're designing the physical layout of your room, you need to be thinking about those two parts working hand in hand, your procedures and the physical layout, each facilitating effective instruction. Students are actually going to be looking at examples of their work and looking to the information on bulletin boards for relevant, timely content, such as, what are tonight's assignments? What is the current temperature if you do that in your math meeting? What do we have coming up in the next week? A calendar that's actually updated and has information useful to them. So all of that and their student work, which, just a reminder, if you remember FERPA from 202, there needs to be no graded student work up on a board with identifying names associated with those grades. So you can display student work, but you have to make sure that you're not sharing evidence of your assessment of them on that student work. So you want to see them actually utilizing it, accessing it, adding to it, and in these rooms where the physical layout is well thought out and procedures are associated with that and taught well, then you're going to see that students are easily focusing on instruction. And it's just night and day when you see a classroom where the distractions are few and far between and students are working and taking care of themselves in that room, and the teacher is able to work on individual assistance and small group assistance instead of attending to every student's need related to where are the tissues. So again, within the textbook that was not required for purchase, there are a couple of notes I just want to add to this that came straight from the book, and one of them references computers and computer usage. If you're fortunate enough to have a room full of iPads or a station with 4 or 5 computers, you have to be aware of so many things, with the most important one being the fact that you need to be able to see the screens of the computers at all times. You need to have a way to keep track of all the materials that belong with them, and you need to make sure that you have a system of organizing those materials if the students are allowed to take them to their desks, such as with the iPads, because things can get crazy pretty quickly, especially when it comes to charging a laptop or an iPad. Nightmares can occur from that. So bookshelves were another item that came up in the text that I just thought would be a good way to, not a good way, but a good thing to address, because a lot of times you come in with a lot of books in your first years of teaching because you've been collecting them, because teachers tend to love to collect books. I don't know why we do. We just collect things like that. So we have bookshelves that we need to buy or that we need to use that are in a classroom. So it's important that you think about, before you get everything else laid out, you think about, how do I want my students to access these? How are my students going to check them in, check them out? If they are going to do that, what happens? Who's going to take care of those shelves? Are the students going to take care of them? How am I going to organize them? Is there going to be a clear way to organize them? Perhaps I'm really picky about this because I spent a lot of my youth as a young adult librarian, but it's something that if you manage it well, it really adds to the richness of your classroom. Additionally, there are some comments about the classroom materials you need to be sure are accessible or appropriately accessible, and how students are supposed to access them or not access them. So I always had in my classroom procedures what were off limits areas and items, and what were safe areas and items. For instance, I had a small refrigerator in my classroom, and that was an off limits area. But unless I taught it that way, they still touched it. I even had to teach them not to touch the lava lamps, because I had lava lamps as some of my decor. I had to explain to them, because they hadn't seen them before, that they're very hot when you touch them. That's an off limits item. You don't touch that. So, but some of the items and materials that are important to be considering, especially when you're shopping back to school sales. Pens, pencils, and paper seems logical, I know, but you have to think about, are they going to access a common source of pencils and you're going to let them rent them, or they're going to have to trade something for a pencil? Are you just going to supply all the pencils and pick them up? A lot more goes into it than you think about. So be watching for those things in your classrooms. How do other people handle them? Going on down the list, paper clips, staplers, and staples. Notice that rubber bands are not on the list, which I happen to fully agree with, because rubber bands are just evil and dangerous. And I had a rule that rubber bands did not enter my classroom, and they could not be found in there. And if they did, it was all going to break loose at that point, because it was always going to be a bad scenario if a rubber band came into the classroom. Music in a CD player. Let's go more modern and say, as long as you have, your laptop, are you going to be able to project your sound from anything that you show, a video, sound, whatever, or video music or anything? Is your laptop going to handle that and everyone be able to hear it appropriately? Band-aids. Tissues. Buy the generic Band-Aids, by the way. Don't pay for the nice ones. They don't care that much. Tissues. You absolutely need to have a massive supply of tissues in your classroom. And any other first aid equipment. You should always have a pair of rubber gloves in your desk and know all of your procedures for bloodborne pathogens, which you'll be required to go through every year at your school. You'll watch a little video and learn about it, and learn about other easily communicable diseases. So, attendance materials, class sheets, seating charts need to be up front, ready to go at all times, and you shouldn't have to handle them all the time. Teach your students how to do that if you can. Make it part of your procedures. And I would suggest this next item as one of the most important items. And if you haven't read, if you're a special ed major, I'm not sure you use this in any of your coursework, but The First Days of School by Harry Wong and Rosemary Wong. If you haven't accessed that yet, to look at how do you hand in papers and how do you how do you get your papers back in class? There's a video that goes with that book that explains like how something as simple as that completely sets the tone for the rest of your procedures. Because if you can work out procedures such as something as complicated as handling all of the paperwork that is generated in a day in a classroom, then you can physically design your room based around those procedures that will work most effectively to give you the most instructional time with your students. Um, so uh, I think probably what I should close with is just I would like for you to think about in your goals setting for this week, since it's different than the weeks that will come, that are to come. I would like for you to look at the classrooms that you're in, look at as many classrooms as you can as you're passing them in the hallway. Be thinking about all of these items that we've mentioned and be collecting evidence of one of the areas that you really wanted to focus your observations on for your goal setting. So, for example, you decide you really want to look at how each classroom handles its classroom library of books or its technology, iPads, then really focus the goal that you choose on something like that and be looking for that in your observations, because there's a little bit too much to look at to cover all of this in 1 week of goal setting. Thank you.